Most people that have tried to lose a significant portion of their body weight and fat mass probably knows that there are some factors that actually make that weight loss difficult and that actually make that person more likely to regain the weight. They also probably know that that weight loss, and this is something we talk about in this class, rarely occurs linearly. Like you put in X amount of effort and you see this very linear decrease in someone's weight and fat mass. That rarely happens. I'm sure it happens for some people, but that's really not what we see in the literature. And what is believed is that there's a number of changes that our body undergoes when we're in a caloric deficit, when we're in an energy deficit, to get us back up to that previous weight. And some people believe that with obesity, you're kind of changing that new weight that the body wants to get back to, right? So if someone, was 300 pounds and they lost 100, the body may want to get back up to there or change in certain ways to help facilitate the regaining of that weight. And please, I think it's very important for me to say that someone that is in a larger body or even in a smaller body that does want to lose fat mass and keep it off, this is 100% possible. Of course it's possible, but the body does fight it. And the body does recruit a number of different adaptations in order to help us stay at a heavier size. As part of the reason for this lecture is for us to help understand why it's not as easy as some people might think it is to lose weight and keep it off, especially for someone in a larger body. Okay, so when someone is at an energy deficit, there are certain changes, like I said, that can promote that regain of the previous state. And when a person has lost a large amount of weight, if they do gain it back, for some reason, and we don't fully understand this, when individuals gain that weight back, there's often a preference for regaining fat mass when that weight is gained back. We'll discuss some of the studies that show that, okay? So there are more than the couple that I listed here, but these are kind of the two main ones that are discussed in the literature as far as how the body fights some of this this fat loss, this weight loss, this energy deficit. And one that's clear that, again, anyone who's ever tried to lose weight probably understands is that there's a appetitive state that is created, i.e., you typically want to eat more. You feel less full and you want to eat more. But also something's going on with our metabolic rate as well. When someone's lost a lot of weight, their resting metabolic rate might actually be lower than expected for someone at that weight, okay? Which makes, again, that affects energy expenditure, which we of course know is a key component of energy balance, which again might promote that regain of weight. Okay, so the first study I want to look at, which is a seminal paper in this area, is out of Joseph Proieto's lab in Australia. He's retired now, but this was a major paper that came out of his lab by Priya Sumithran. It was a 10-week dietary intervention, quite a drastic dietary intervention with 50 individuals with a mean BMI of 35, most of which, 2/3 of which were female. What they did is they put these individuals on a 10-week OptiFast diet. So the majority of the calories that they consumed, which were quite low compared to their typical calories, were from these OptiFast shakes, like they're like boost shakes. They're often used for weight loss. It's a very low calorie diet, plus they would consume about 2 cups of veggies. So they did this for 10 weeks, and only 34 of the 50 people completed the study. So about 30% of people did not complete the study. I think that's worth noting as well, because just drinking shakes every day for life doesn't seem very enjoyable, to me at least. But what was found was, unsurprisingly, that there was a significant drop in weight over that 8 to 10 week period. There was a mean weight loss of about 13.5 kilograms, which is just around 30 pounds. And I thought this first slide was also important because they showed that, unsurprisingly, the patients that did not complete the study, they didn't lose as much weight. These are in the light gray bars on top. And the patients that completed the study, they tended to lose more weight. But in both the people that completed the study and that those that didn't, we see this kind of relationship between study, right? Participation in the study and post-study, right? Where people lose a lot of weight during a study and then they gain some of that weight back, sometimes all of it back, sometimes more once that intervention is gone. And that goes for any intervention. That goes for pharmacological interventions, dietary interventions, physical activity interventions. And we actually see a bit of this curve as well, although not as much of a drastic regain, or not at all as much regain, with things like bariatric surgery as well. The second major finding of this study was the changes in appetite-related hormones. And the way to read these charts, because it could be a bit confusing, is that each of them, the x-axis is postprandial time. So we're looking at the time after a person has eaten. Okay, so the person has eaten, and now we're looking at how these appetite and satiety related factors change based on where we're at in time compared to this study, right? Are we at baseline? Are we 10 weeks? So right after the study finishes, or are we at 62 weeks? So over a year later when they followed up with these patients, okay, with these people. So if you look at the 10-week ghrelin, it was the highest. So right, like when that diet was kind of at its peak, right at the end of the study, that person after a meal had the highest ghrelin response, and these results were significant, suggesting that these appetitive or pro-orexigenic, like eat factors during kind of that really right in the prime, right at the end of that study, those pro-appetite factors were the strongest, and they remained elevated above baseline even about a year later. Okay, so that is a pro-appetite factor. All of the last three on here, that's why I color-coded them, these are satiety factors. These are factors that tend to reduce our desire to eat. And unsurprisingly, again, we see a decrease in the amount of peptide Y that was secreted, in the amount of amylin that was secreted, especially kind of in the shorter term, in the amount of CCK that was released after this diet was either going on or even a year later. Okay, so there was significant reductions in peptide Y response. Amylin, I haven't talked about amylin, but it's released by your beta cells of the pancreas along with insulin, and it is a satiety factor. It's something that helps us feel full. We're going to talk about that later when we talk about pharmacology and obesity. Okay, peptide YY is also a don't eat signal, a anorexigenic signal. Okay, and so all of these factors, peptide YY, amylin, CCK, and leptin as well, which isn't shown in here, all of these factors that are supposed to make us feel full or not want to eat as much, all of them, their release patterns decreased with these higher, with these more extreme diets, and even some time after that diet had finished as well. And this was also related to the hunger ratings. When they asked people about their subjective experiences with hunger, we saw that with the, right in the middle of the study, the 10-week group, and also like a year after the study finished, after lunch, this is also postprandial time, after lunch or a meal, they still had higher hunger ratings, and their desire to eat was also higher than it was at baseline. So taking all of this together, you know, it's unsurprising when you go on some sort of extreme diet why the weight comes back just for appetite related reasons. And it seems that the body is defending against some of that energy deficit and weight loss, one or both of those, by increasing signals that make us want to eat more. So this is physiological. I think that's important to say. It's not a failing of the person. It's not a moral failing. It's something that's going on physiologically that is promoting that desire to eat more, which often results in eating more. Okay, so as in the conclusion of this study, they said although short-term weight loss is possible, of course you can lose weight through dietary restriction, only a small minority of individuals with obesity maintained diet-induced weight loss in the long term. Okay, which is again so common in these kind of drastic weight loss studies, but even in the non-drastic ones too, we see more weight regain than weight maintenance as a general rule. Okay, a multitude of hormones, peptides, and nutrients are involved in the homeostatic regulation of body weight, many of which are perturbed during weight loss. So all these things that help us maintain homeostatic balance and maintain energy balance, they're a bit messed up when we go through this energy deficit. Whether these changes represent a transient compensatory response or are they only just happening like during when you're trying to lose weight, right? But important finding of this study is that many of these alterations, they stuck around for 12 months after the weight loss. Even after weight gain, those appetite ratings, even after people gained weight, their subjective appetite ratings, as well as these pro-orexigenic eat factors, they were still higher even after the individual gained weight, which helps to explain a little bit at least of why often people don't just gain the weight back, but they gain a little bit more back as well. Okay, so this brings us to a really interesting, albeit couldn't go on today, study called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment and a concept called fat overshoot. So let's go through the study and it'll be clear really quickly why we wouldn't do this in 2023, which is the time that I'm shooting this video. Okay, so as the name implied, this study happened in Minnesota, and it was a starvation study run by someone named Ansel Keys, Dr. Ansel Keys, at I think it was the University of Minnesota. And basically these were individuals who were conscientious objectors. How many people was it? 32 men were conscientious objectors. Like they wanted to serve their country, but they didn't want to fight in World War II. Okay, they didn't want to kill anyone. They're pacifists, as they call them, but they wanted to serve their country. So there was this like notice in the newspaper to come and be part of this starvation study that could help. The goal was like people were coming back for war and they were going to be underfed, malnourished. Some people were in like prisoner of war camps. So how do we refeed people in the healthiest way possible? So there was a component to it that seems like, there was a purpose to the study. And actually the amount of research that has come out of this study and the things we've learned about this study, so what they did is they came to the university. They were like housed kind of under the sports complex, I think, at the university, and they weren't allowed to basically leave for a year. So first of all, they showed up and they were observed for 3 months, and they were observed to have a mean caloric intake of about 3,500 kilocalories per day. Okay, so once they knew their mean caloric intake, they basically more than halved that. So these individuals, these young men went from consuming about 3,500 calories today to about 1,600 calories a day. That's a ridiculous drop. It's like half amount of calories. The first part of the study is shown here, that control period, and you see body weight on the y-axis. And in the second part of the study, right, which was for 6 months, they went on this semi-starvation diet, right? So where their calories were cut in half by that much. And then in the refeed period, this R1 to R12, right, for 3 months, 12 weeks, they were placed into 4 different conditions. 8 people consumed like 1570 plus 400. 8 people consumed 1570 plus 800. 8 people consumed 1600, whatever, plus 1200. 8 people consumed close to what their original diets were. Okay, so the amount of calories in each group was a bit different to see kind of which pattern of refeeding was the most effective. And then you can look at the dietary breakdown of those different diets in this part here. Okay, they were also surveyed for 24 hours a day, and they were required to get a certain amount of exercise per week. I want to say it was 20 miles. 25 miles they had to walk every week. So it was significant. It was a significant amount of exercise they had to do as well, okay? And they weren't allowed to eat past this. So some of the most interesting parts of the findings from this study were those kind of changes in these men during both the starvation and refeeding part, the rehabilitation part. Men were obsessed with food. They would like put pictures of food up in their little rooms. They would read cookbooks as like porn. They would get mad at people for not finishing food on their plate. They had a number of emotional and psychological issues like depression, what was called hysteria, severe emotional distress. One of them even cut off 3 of his fingers with an axe. He doesn't know if he did that on purpose or if he, just did it by accident. He wasn't actually sure about that. But the point is, severe starvation really messes with the mind. Okay, I think that's a very clear conclusion of this study. And another important conclusion of the study that's relative to our own purposes is that once a refeeding period happened, so they structured refeeding. I didn't mention this before. They had structured refeeding, right? R1 to R2 over here. But then they were allowed to stick around too, where they could just eat anything, right? So they could eat whatever they wanted. It was just ad libitum eating. And in that period, men, a lot of them ate way beyond the initial amounts that they ate, up to about 5,000, even 11. Was one dude that reported eating 11,000 per day on the weekends. I don't even know how you do that, but that's impressive. And with these men, weight returned to 109% of initial. So this was kind of one of the initial studies that brought up this concept of set point theory, which we're not really going to talk about too much, but this kind of gives some credence to that that potential that we kind of tend to come back to the weight that we started at. But something else really interesting about this study is that you see that, first of all, their body weight, like we said before, ended up higher. Okay, I don't know if you can tell, but this is higher than over here. Ended up higher than when they started, and their body fat was higher as well. So actually, there was a bit of a fat overshoot when they were regaining weight, and so more fat was gained than lean mass. But even at the end of, well, at least the study period, those individuals had gained back more fat mass than lean mass as part of that regain to about 10% higher than their initial weight. Okay, so again, showing some of the psychological and physiological adaptations to, again, extreme starvation. So that's, this isn't a typical study. All the studies we're going to talk about today are a bit extreme, but they give us insight into what's happening to the body and how the body defends against weight loss. Okay, which brings us to the last major study I wanted to look at today, which is a fun study to look at, which is the Biggest Loser study, or persistent metabolic adaptation study. And this involved The Biggest Loser. So you've probably heard of this competition. I can't stand it. I think it's terrible. The first time I saw it, I was like, what the F is this? I don't remember how many people exactly, but there's like 2 teams, like a red and a blue team, and they go through crazy dietary restriction and extreme over exercising, and they compete for who loses the most amount of weight and which team collectively loses the most amount of weight. And they I don't know, it's full of shame and guilt, and it's unrealistic, and I think it does just negative things for obesity in general. But anyways, and so a researcher by the name of Kevin Hall wanted to study what kind of changes occur in these individuals kind of after the competition and 6 years later as well. And what his hypothesis is that, or what he wanted to explore, I should say, is that, these people are getting extreme exercise. Wouldn't that mean that they maintain lean body mass? And wouldn't that mean that the reductions in basal metabolic rate that we've seen in other studies, those would be less severe in these individuals? Following the competition, so I actually don't remember, it's a season of TV long, however long that is. The mean amount of weight loss in these participants was quite drastic, about 58 kilograms. So over 100 pounds, plus or minus 25 kilograms. So it was quite a wide range. And what they also found is that from the beginning of competition to the end of competition, the resting metabolic rate dropped by about 610 kilocalories per day. And again, there was a lot of variability in that as well. And it's not surprising that RMR goes down because someone's losing weight, right? And we know that adipose tissue has a metabolic rate, but also it's kind of impossible not to lose lean mass as well. So we expect metabolic rate to go down. Also just worth highlighting here how friggin' stigmatizing the practices of this show were. Like making people go on a scale. They had to wear like a tank top and pants. They weren't allowed to wear something that covered their abdomen. And maybe they didn't have a problem with that, but I would have had a problem with that. And stand up there while everyone looks at your weight. I think it's friggin' terrible. Anyways, that's another story, okay? But what they found is that compared to right after the study ended, right? So I guess the study was 30 weeks long. Compared to right after the study ended and 6 years later, the majority of participants, that's kind of the average there, the majority of participants gained their weight back. Okay, so that doesn't surprise me at all. TV's no longer watching you. No one's yelling at you anymore. Not surprising that you gained the weight back. Okay, there was a slight increase in lean mass when that weight was gained, but it was mostly that gain in mass, in overall body weight. Majority of that was due to an increase in fat mass. So the people that regained weight, which is the majority of like 13 out of the 14, I think it was, the majority of them gained fat back and not lean mass back. So this led to the exploration of this concept of metabolic adaptation. And metabolic adaptation is defined as the residual resting metabolic rate after adjusting for changes in body composition and age. What does that mean? So following a weight loss intervention, so if someone loses weight, we expect their RMR to be lower, right? Because they're smaller in size, often less lean mass and less fat mass as well, which we know has a metabolic rate as well, okay? So we expect RMR to drop, but is it even lower than we expect? That's the metabolic adaptation. That's this concept. And what they found is that at the 6-year follow-up, the majority of participants had a lower resting metabolic rate than at the end of the competition. And it was even lower than, again, what would be expected for someone at that particular weight. So you see in A here, if we look at the average, the majority of those individuals, even though they gained weight, remember, they gained weight back and their RMR is even lower than before, right? And as far as what they called metabolic adaptation, there was even more metabolic adaptation. So what they're suggesting again, that RMR was even lower than what would be expected for that individual's weight 6 years after competition. So again, suggesting that that extreme exercise and dieting that happened during the show wasn't sustainable, A, shocker. A, wasn't sustainable, and B, really messed with people's metabolic rate, which is part of why it would be more difficult for these individuals to keep the weight off. So it's no surprise that they did gain the weight back. Okay? These researchers estimated that the change was about 500 kilocalories per day. So mean RMR after 6 years was about 500 kilocalories per day lower than what would be expected for that person's size and age, etc. 500 kilocalories a day, that's like a Big Mac, just to put that in perspective. So like one Big Mac less per day, okay? Or like a chicken breast and a half less per day these people could eat in order to maintain that new size. So they would have to eat even below what someone else of that size is to be able to maintain that size. So part of their conclusions, although the Biggest Loser contestants indeed spared fat-free mass relative to similar weight losses via bariatric surgery, so they were able to retain some of that lean mass, resting metabolic rate fell disproportionately during the weight loss competition. right? And although he expected, this is Kevin Hall again, this is in a revisit to the to that Biggest Loser study. So this is from 2021. Yeah, he did this reinterpretation and rediscussion of that in Obesity, the journal Obesity. And these are some of his comments about that. So I expected that suppressed RMR would normalize once when active weight loss ceased and a more sustainable lifestyle was adopted. Okay. My expectations were dashed when we found a minus 500 kilocalorie per day persistent metabolic adaptation. So when this study came out, it was big news. It was all over the news cycle. The New York Times picked it up, as shown here. So in this unit, we've talked about some of the defenses against weight loss that the body recruits. First, we looked at that OptiFast 10-week study and the follow-up to show how the body sends these appetite signals and decreases our satiety signals to perhaps promote a regain of weight following a weight loss intervention, and some of those hunger signals might stay elevated even after weight loss intervention, again making it more difficult for you to lose weight. We also saw that when people go on a crazy starvation diet, like in the Minnesota experiment, once they're allowed to eat again, they not only go back to where they were before, but they might overshoot, especially with the amount of fat mass that is regained. And we also saw with the Biggest Loser study that extreme forms of weight loss that even do include exercise as well, people tend to gain the weight back, A, as we keep seeing, and B, that can really mess with someone's resting metabolic rate. And again, changes in that resting metabolic rate might be in part why we tend to see people do gain the weight back, okay? So important to keep in mind that all of these weight loss protocols that we discussed are extreme. Okay, most people do not lose weight by the means that we talked about in this unit. Okay, but we don't understand everything that's going on, but we do know that there are these defenses against weight loss that are going to make it more difficult for some people to keep that weight off. And it's unsurprising that weight is regained after these weight loss interventions that are really, really drastic. So if you're working with clients that are trying to lose weight through drastic measures, this might be something that you discuss with them, right? That the more drastic the diet is, more restrictive it is, it might promote more severe of these metabolic physiological adaptations that promote regaining of that fat mass. Okay, that said, I think it's important always to come back to the fact that I don't want to be like Debbie Downer over here saying like you can't lose weight. Of course someone can lose fat mass from their body, can lose weight from their body, and they absolutely can keep it off as well. That said, it is more difficult for some people, and these extreme forms of weight loss, we do not recommend them. Okay. Also, in knowing what these adaptations, physiological adaptations, in knowing that they're going on, this can help us maybe mitigate some of these adaptations as well. So how do we make sure that they're not as significant, and that people won't, have a tendency towards that weight regain? Okay, so just to end this off, a few things to think about. There was this recent systematic review and meta-analysis that looked at a number of different studies that had rapid weight loss protocols versus slow weight loss protocols, and they found that a more gradual rate of weight loss versus rapid ones, they kind of produced similar results at the end of the day. However, as is noted here, gradual weight loss promoted greater reductions in fat mass and body fat percentage, and gradual weight loss also significantly preserved resting metabolic rate. So again, I think one of what I'm getting from all these studies that we talked about is that to not be too drastic with the weight loss measures. And as always, as we're always going to say, if someone's trying to lose weight, they have to start living the life that they're going to live lifestyle-wise when they achieve a smaller size. So you already want to start living the life that is going to support that perhaps smaller body, right? So finding strategies that help you eat often less in a way that is sustainable, that is enjoyable, that still lets you be social, that still lets you enjoy your life, to find strategies that help you increase energy expenditure through NEAT or through exercise that are, again, sustainable, enjoyable, relevant for that individual, right? So working with someone to find these long-term strategies, and that's hard if you are in like the personal training industry or like the rapid weight loss industry, because everyone just wants fast results. So I think that requires a narrative shift, right? Around, lose weight fast. I think we have to get way out of this lose weight fast mentality because the body defends against that, right? So what are some sustainable changes to put in place that can help people lose weight, perhaps if they want to, more slowly, but more sustainable? A few more things to keep in mind is that might help to mitigate some of these adaptations that promote this weight regain this is kind of a major recommendation you see in any real weight loss program that knows what it's talking about, is often focus on protein intake, right? And there's lots of studies to support this. For instance, in this study by Westerp, Plantega, and Lejeune in 2004, they found that individuals with obesity that lost 5 to 10% of their body weight over 3 months, in those that ate more protein, like 48 grams of protein above their regular amount, they regained less body mass, and what they regained was mostly fat-free mass of the people that did regain some weight. Okay, and also protein is more satiating, it fills you up, it has a higher thermic effect. It's one of the most easy to recommend strategies for promoting a healthier energy deficit and maintenance of a lower weight. Okay, maybe increasing fiber intake. The jury's out on fiber and weight management, but it tends to promote fullness. A lot of people find that it promotes fullness. Also, fiber-rich foods tend to be higher in satiety ratings as well, so it can't hurt. Okay, plus they add more volume to the diet, so you eat less food and you might feel more full. Can't hurt to recommend fiber. Okay, and then another strategy that might help too, although research still needs a little bit more in this area, is taking diet refeeds or diet breaks, where let's say someone's on an energy deficit, but maybe for 1 or 2 days they eat closer to maintenance or a little bit over maintenance compared to that stronger energy deficit. And the physiology of how that actually works is maybe unclear, is still trying to be parsed out, but this might be a strategy as well, right? So not being on that extreme caloric deficit for all the time, but having 1 or 2 days a week where that, not that we go back and eat how we were before, but maybe more towards what you will eat at a maintenance phase. Okay, so some things to think about as we move into our discussion on obesity management, of why I think it's important first to cover why people regain weight and why lifestyle intervention without proper systems in place, proper supports in place, with unrealistic expectations or really drastic measures, they're rarely sustainable. Right? And that's why we need to work with people, get to know people, build relationships with people, and help them figure out for themselves what is going to work for them in a long-term sustainable way. Okay, so some things to think about as we get into this unit on obesity management.